Since 2020, Africa, and most especially West Africa and the Sahel, has been experiencing what many are now calling a coup wave. From Mali to Guinea, Niger to Burkina Faso, Chad, Sudan, Madagascar, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, the contagion has spread. And those are just the countries in which the takeovers have been successful. Many others have had attempts that were foiled, with Benin being the most recent example. Africa is not new to coups, with the continent experiencing its first coup when the Free Officers Movement overthrew King Farouk of Egypt in 1952, followed by Sudan in 1958. And then West Africa had its first coup, one that would lead to a rippling effect. On January 13, 1963, Togolese soldiers assassinated the country's first post-independence president, Sylvanus Olympio, and took over the government. In that decade alone, there were over 41 coup attempts, resulting in 25 successful ones, with Nigeria and Ghana being amongst them. In the 1970s, there were 42 attempts and 18 were successful. In the 1980s, there were 39 attempts with 22 successful. In the 1990s, 39 were again attempted, but only 16 were successful. But then, there was a lull in the first decade of the 2000s. The continent saw not only fewer coup attempts, but also fewer successful ones. So, as I said, not new, but then something happened in 2011 that many have claimed is one of the contributory factors for the coups that took place in the Sahel. In 2011, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown, and thousands of Tuareg fighters who had once served in Gaddafi's military and as mercenaries returned to their homes in the north of Mali and Niger, fully armed. For years, they had complained of economic and political marginalization by the southern government. So now they returned, armed and trained, and ready to start a rebellion. So they did, in what is now known as the Tuareg Rebellion. In 2012, they waged war against the Malian government with the goal of attaining independence for the northern region of Mali, known as Azawad. The Malian state lost control of the north. Junior military officers mutinied and overthrew President Amadou Toumani Touré, and a vacuum was left open that jihadists will soon fill, one that would attempt to consume the Sahel. As a result of this vacuum, West Africa had a new problem: jihadist insurgencies, militant Islamists hell-bent on overtaking countries in the Sahel and establishing either a caliphate or rulership by Islamic law. They soon spread to Burkina Faso and Niger. For decades, the governments tried to quell the spread. France and the UN peacekeeping force got involved. Nothing was solved. The militaries became fed up. Citizens went out in protest in Mali, and then the Malian military struck. In August 2020, a group of Malian soldiers in trucks stormed Bamako, its capital, and detained then-President Abubakar Keïta, citing insecurity amongst other challenges. Colonel Assimi Goïta, the man who led the coup, was installed as vice president of a transition government. But when the president, Bar Indao, reshuffled the cabinet, removing key military leaders, the military once more intervened, arrested the transition president, and declared Goïta the president. In essence, Mali had a coup within a coup, led by the same man. And Mali wasn't the only country whose military had been angered by the jihadist insurgency. When it was announced in January 2002 that President Kambore had been deposed by the military led by Damiba, many thought the insecurity plaguing parts of Burkina Faso will be contained. But when it wasn't, there was another coup, led by a young gentleman named Ibrahim Traoré. And then came Niger, also within the Sahel belt. Several factions of the armed forces seized power, suspended the constitution, and placed President Bazoum under house arrest. Its leader, Abdulrahmani Tijani. But beyond issues of insecurity being the principal driver of coups in Africa, there are governance issues, or what analysts have termed democratic backsliding, rigged elections or term extensions, as was the case in Guinea. President Alpha Condé, who had ruled Guinea for 2 terms, changed the constitution and reset the term limits, running again for a highly contested 3rd term. Mass protests broke out. Deadly crackdowns were initiated. Opposition figures were arrested. And then, the special forces, led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, swooped in, suspended the constitution, and took over. In Gabon, the Bongo family, which had ruled Gabon for over 50 years, were overthrown after an election that was deemed opaque. Madagascar and Guinea-Bissau have witnessed coups due to similar issues. Beyond the domestic, there is one key international player that has garnered as much anger and disillusionment from citizens in the Sahel countries, and that player is France. For decades, France stood as the dominant force in the Sahel region, but when the coups in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger took place, they were coupled with rampant anti-France sentiments. Since its former colonies gained independence, France has maintained what many class as neocolonialism over its former colonies. With its policy of Franc-Afrique, it maintained an economic and military shadow. These countries use a currency that is pegged to the euro. French companies have exclusive rights to the mines and resources, as was the case with the uranium in Niger. And they also had military bases in many of these former colonies. Compounded with the insecurity caused by jihadists, France were given a deadline to remove their troops, ambassadors were expelled, and ties almost extinguished. And with France gone, a new partnership emerged: Russia. At the heart of this partnership lies the deployment of quasi-private military companies such as Africa Corps and the Wagner Group. But with new alignments come new enemies. As a result of Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali's alignment with Russia, allegations have been spread of Ukraine providing assistance to jihadist groups fighting in the region. Beyond the international scene, what role have regional bodies such as ECOWAS and AU played? Despite the sanctions and threats of military intervention, neither ECOWAS nor the AU have done much in quelling the coup wave. Some argue that they're in fact enablers of the very many factors that lead to such coups. Let's take, for example, Alassane Ouattara, who has been in power since 2010. In 2016, a new constitution was adopted in Ivory Coast, replacing the old constitution that had a 2-term limit. Ouattara argued that the new constitution reset his term count, allowing him to run again. He was recently elected to his 4th term, and many African leaders, including the current head of the ECOWAS Commission, were present at his inauguration. When Alpha Condé extended his term limit, again, silence from both ECOWAS and the AU. No condemnations, no sanctions, and no suspensions were levied. But when a coup takes place, we get condemnations, sanctions, military interventions, as was the case in Benin, and even a declaration of a state of emergency in West Africa. This double standard matters when regional bodies punish soldiers but ignore civilian leaders who hollow out constitutions. They weaken the very norms they claim to defend. Over time, this silence erodes trust in civilian rule and hands the military a powerful justification that institutions failed and force was the only remaining check. So coups do not emerge in a vacuum. They grow where accountability fails. And in Africa, coups are condemned loudly. Constitutional manipulations, on the other hand, are met with silence. And as we've seen time and time again, that silence has consequences.